Welcome to the Sparkroom webinar series. Sparkroom provides full-service, data-driven marketing and technology solutions to ignite your performance marketing. Our webinars provide actionable advice and insight to help you better strategize, execute, analyze, and optimize your marketing campaign efforts.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, a deep look at the market for undergraduate nursing education. My name is Michelle Verlin, and I'm the marketing manager here at Sparkroom, the leader in performance marketing for the higher education industry. We provide fully transparent, analytics-based strategies that are designed to do one thing: achieve your enrollment marketing objectives. Our superior combination of marketing services and industry-leading marketing software gives schools a competitive advantage, allowing for improved efficiency and better conversion rates. Gray Associates is a strategy consulting firm focused on higher education. Gray helps education clients develop fact-based institutional and marketing strategies that maximize outcomes for students, the school, and its constituencies. Using our industry-leading database and proprietary analytical techniques, we work with faculty and school leadership to develop institutional strategies, select programs, pick locations, and prepare curricula. Our fabulous presenters today are Liz Dye, Sparkroom's Director of Marketing Analytics, and Bob Atkins, CEO and founder of Gray Associates. In Liz's role at Sparkroom, she worked with some of the top brands in higher education to develop successful enrollment marketing strategies. She employs performance analysis and database decisions to optimize campaigns. Bob led Gray's entry into the education industry and the development of Gray's proprietary industry database and service offerings. He has worked with all of Gray's education clients, consulting CEOs and CMOs on business strategy, pricing, location selection, and program strategy. He is an expert in business strategy, marketing, sales, and high-tech distribution channels. Now, before I hand it over to Liz and Bob to get started, let me alert you to a few housekeeping notes. First, I'd like to point out some functionality on your webinar control panel, which is located in the top right corner of your screen. If you can't see it, look for an orange box with an arrow. If you click on the arrow, the box will expand. If you have any questions during the session, please type your questions into the question box, and Liz will answer them at the end of the presentation. And so will Bob. Second, I'd just like to assure everyone that in a few days, I'll be sending out a recording of today's presentation, as well as a copy of the presentation deck itself. Again, thank you for joining us, and I'll pass things over to Bob to get us started.
And actually, I'll jump in here, Michelle. So today, we'll be going through a couple of things related to the undergraduate marketing education undergraduate nursing education market, and specifically we'll be looking at things from a few angles. First, we'll do a general survey of nursing programs to gauge how the whole family of degrees and outcomes is currently performing. And then we'll assess student demand, completions, and employment outlook in 3 different nursing areas. First, the entry-level market for licensed practical and vocational nurses. Then the same set of criteria for associate's degree nurses. And finally, the bachelor's nursing market, including RN to BSN bridge and traditional degrees. From a marketing perspective, we want to come away from each of these topics with a better understanding of this audience in a few key areas. First, what the key student profile attributes are based on aggregate enrollment data from Sparkroom's marketing software. Then, what the prospective student demand trends are based on Google query counts and Sparkroom student inquiry data. Marketing performance, or how effectively marketers are translating demand into enrolled students. And then from all of this, a solid foundation to understand where demand trends are heading in 2015 and beyond.
We'd like to help you understand the future prospects for undergraduate nursing education. Is there strong and growing student demand? Is competition intensifying, or is it lightening up in certain sectors? Does the program lead to good jobs and pay? How does this vary between the LPN level and the BSN level? But most important, will there be enough nurses to meet patient needs and employer demand? Or will there be the oft-reported shortage of nurses? Now, Liz will share an overview of trends in undergraduate market for nursing.
Great. So first, let's meet the typical nursing student. Keep in mind that this is inclusive of all undergraduate nursing degree levels, from nursing assistants through BSN candidates. There are some key attributes that help us define the general audience. First, they're predominantly female at almost 90% overall, Although that's a pretty resounding majority, it's actually not that different from health professions as a whole, which in 2013 had 84% of completions from female students. This group is fairly mixed between younger and middle-aged students, ranging between 24 and 54 years old. As a whole, the segment gravitates towards the middle income bracket. There are some differences between the individual degree level audiences that we'll see when we break these out. One thing each of the degree level segments has in common is heavy use of social media. Each segment has user rates of at least 75% and higher. The network of choice by a large margin is Facebook. But despite a strong affinity for social media and high web use in general, traditional media is still influential for this audience. That means that non-digital outlets like TV and radio are still key in building brand awareness. And finally, this is a group that, whether by choice or by circumstance, typically continues to seek out new ways to advance their professional knowledge and status. This is likely driven by continual changes in patient care and health technology, as well as the need to attain additional degrees in order to advance professionally. Also, given that many of these students come from working families, motivational factors almost always include the ability to improve family finances. In order to get a sense of what's happening at the very front of the student prospect funnel, here's a look at the 12-month Google search query trend. These totals represent any nursing education-related keyword searches from September 2014 through August 2015. Aside from seasonal fluctuations, the general direction has been one of consistent growth. This past August showed an almost 22% year-over-year increase. The prospective student inquiry volume shows equally strong growth in 2015 so far. Monthly volumes from 2013 through 2015 are shown here. Despite the general downward volume trend we've seen for higher education as a whole, there has been consistent year-over-year growth for nursing since March 2013. In particular, this growth accelerated in the first quarter of 2015, with January and February up 38% and 43.5% respectively. That growth rate has slowed somewhat in more recent months, particularly June, but overall inquiries are up 16.5% from 2014. I mentioned earlier that we'd be focusing on 3 specific nursing areas: the LPN, associates, and bachelor's in nursing. Here's a breakdown of how our data set is divided between the 3 programs. Associates RN programs have the lowest share of volume, with just over 17% of the total. LPN programs have a slightly higher share at 18.57%, but the BSN is clearly the dominant program format here, at over 64% of the inquiries generated between all 3. Taking a look at geographic demand distribution, here's a map of student inquiry volumes by state for 2015 year-to-date. Green states have the higher share of student inquiries, and red states have a lower share. As you can see, the inquiries generally follow the population centers of the U.S., with strong student demand in states like New York, Texas, Pennsylvania, and California. Florida and Arizona have particularly strong demand. That's likely due to aging populations in each state. Both are also home to large school systems that provide students with both campus-based and distance learning options. Conversion rates for nursing programs have been consistently strong over the past 32 months, albeit with some ups and downs along the way. Just to clarify, in this context, a conversion refers to any prospective student who first inquired and then applied, enrolled, or started at a school. We measure these based on the original inquiry cohort, meaning that someone who inquired in August but didn't apply until September would be considered an August conversion. That's important to note, as some of the more recent months in 2015 likely aren't fully mature yet, particularly as many schools have false starts and are just beginning to report back the results. With that in mind, average conversion rates across nursing programs, across all programs rather, typically hover between 5 and 7%. So nursing's average of 8.5% for the same time period shown here means that it's more efficient than average. 2014, and especially September through November of that year, saw some particularly strong conversion rates from nursing inquiries. Averages during that time frame ended up near or even slightly above 10%. Typically, when we see increases in inquiry volume, like we have been for nursing, performance will dip as a result of decreased efficiency. However, there's still likely to be an increase in conversion rates for 2015 monthly cohorts as some of these prospects enroll in coming weeks and months, especially if we see the same Q3, Q4 uptick that we saw in 2014. The combination of strong conversion rates and increased inquiry volume is certainly a sign of healthy demand for nursing education. One of the reasons why nursing inquiries have a higher than average performance rate has to do with a large share of volume contributed by first-party sources. In this instance, we're defining first-party sources as anything that's a school-branded marketing initiative. This includes channels such as paid search, website and SEO, display, offline media, and social media. Third-party is inclusive of all affiliate marketing channels, including standard affiliate data inquiries, as well as hot transfers. As you can see, the share of first-party inquiries starts out at well over half in 2013, then steadily increases in 2014 and again into 2015, where those channels now contribute almost 70% of total volume. This is substantially more volume from first-party channels than we see for the general program pool, which only accounted for about 44% of all inquiries in the first half of 2015. This indicates that schools are generating strong demand via branded initiatives for nursing programs, which are typically more efficient but do require strong competitive positioning to draw students specifically to institutions directly. And that's good news for nursing program marketers, since the conversion rates for first-party channels shown here are significantly higher than those of third-party channels by a magnitude of 2 to 3 times on average. First-party channel conversions follow a similar trend to the overall inquiry performance. Last year was especially strong, with an average rate of 13.6%. Third-party channels have seen steady performance decline since 2013 and now are closer to average program performance at just over 2%. However, these will likely come up somewhat and meet or exceed 2014 levels. To give a bit more detail on the trends within these marketing channel categories, here's the breakout of inquiry volume for 2015 so far. School websites are by far the largest contributor of student inquiries, with over 38%. Affiliate data leads are next in line with almost 30% of inquiries. Paid search is right behind it with about 24.5% of 2015 inquiries. All other channels contribute 1% or less of total volume. However, given what we know about these more brand awareness focused channels, it's likely that they're helping to drive inquiries back to organic or paid landing pages despite not receiving last click credit in all cases. So now we'll get into the specific degree level trends in student and employer demand and outcomes. We'll start with one of the most popular entry-level nursing degrees, the licensed practical or licensed vocational nursing program. We'll start again with a profile of the average LPN candidate and specifically focus on some of the ways in which these students are different from the overall nursing pool. Again, this audience is predominantly female at nearly 89%. However, they tend to be younger than the average nursing student and more likely to be single. 43.2% are between 24 and 34 years old, and 64% are unmarried. Additionally, this audience tends to be in lower income brackets. 35% have an annual household income between $20,000 and $39,000 a year, and another 20% have an annual income below $20,000. And although some prospects may have prior college experience, 80% have not graduated from college in the past. Looking at their media consumption patterns, this audience is typically accessing the web during off-peak hours, particularly overnight and early morning. Additionally, the majority of internet access is via mobile devices. 63% report this as the primary access point in their homes. Two other key points regarding student motivation are, one, that being able to support their family is still a main driver for this audience. Despite the fact that this is largely young and single demographic, the majority do have children, over 57% of total households. And two, most LPN prospects are coming from employment in sectors other than healthcare. Building and ground maintenance, protective services and food prep, and office and administrative support are common current employment fields for LPN students. So being able to find a career that affords more support for young families is certainly a key motivator for this audience. Front-end search query volume is strong for the LPN program keywords. The seasonal patterns are similar with spikes in January and August. However, LPN terms specifically are a bit stronger in June and July than the average keyword set, which declines a bit during those 2 months. Year-over-year growth was also slightly higher here than for the general nursing group, up 24.4% since 2014. Inquiry volume, on the other hand, tells a very different story from the search query trend and also from nursing as a whole. Instead of positive growth, we've actually seen demand decline for LPN programs in recent months. This volume trend more closely resembles that of the general higher education inquiry space over the past 2.5 years, a volume peak in January of 2013, then subsequent month-over-month decline before leveling off in 2015. Overall inquiry volume was down 8.1% in August year-over-year, and off almost 44% from 2013's total. The story in the conversion rates isn't much better. Where general undergrad nursing performance has improved steadily since 2013, the LPN rates have in most cases stayed flat or actually declined. Aside from January, 2013 seems to be the winner in almost every month, and 2015 has lagged almost everywhere, particularly in more recent months. This may yet level out a bit with last year, but is unlikely to exceed 2013 performance. The fact that there's been a bit of an uptick in the very front part of the funnel with search query volume is certainly promising, but based on tepid student inquiry volume and even more lackluster conversion rates, LPN programs are far less efficient from a marketing perspective than some of the other nursing degree outcomes that we'll talk about later. I'll let Bob weigh in now on some of the larger market factors that may be creating lower LPN demand in today's undergrad nursing market.
Thanks very much, Liz. Despite the tepid demand, it seems more and more schools want to get into the space, although that growth rate is somewhat slow. Back in 2010, we had 624 schools. We now have 646 academic systems offering LPN programs. That's a growth rate of about 1% a year. If you look at campuses, you also see basically flat growth with the total number of campuses offering LPN programs at about 1,100. Essentially, the number of competitors, one measure of competitive intensity, is only growing very slowly, or one could argue, frankly, it's basically flat. How many LPNs are being trained at these schools? Is it getting more intense at the student level? Actually, the number of LPN completions peaked in 2011 at 67,000. Since then, they have fallen about 13% to 59,000. As a result, the same number of schools are competing for fewer students and graduates. More importantly, roughly 8,000 fewer students are completing LPN programs today than there were in 2011. But, as you know, LPNs have to take the NCLEX exam to get their licenses. How's that testing going? Well, to pass the test, of course, you have to take the test. Since 2010, NCLEX first-time U.S. test takers has fallen even faster than completions because the percentage of completers who take the test has declined from 97% in 2011 to 95% in 2014. As a result of the drop in completions and the drop in the percentage of test takers, first-time U.S. test takers fell from 67,000 to 55,000 in 2014. That's a drop of 11,000 or 17%. But maybe they did better on the test. Well, actually, no. First, a little background. In 2013, nursing leadership made the NCLEX exam more difficult to pass. They also changed the nature of the exam, making it more focused on healthcare concepts. Largely as a result, NCLEX pass rates have been declining, especially since 2013. In 2011 through 2013, they were approximately 84%. By 2015, they were down to 80%. From their peak in 2010, NCLEX first-time pass rates are down 7%. So how many passers do we have left? In 2010, there were just over 58,000 students who passed the NCLEX PN. By 2014, passers dropped to just 46,000, a decline of 22%. In 2014, there were 12,000 fewer first-time passers of the NCLEX PN. But fortunately, there's some other folks who take the test as well. About 5,000 students pass the NCLEX PN on a second or third attempt. So in a sense, the more students fail, the more there are who will retake. A few hundred foreign nurses also pass the test, but it's a very small number. So even with these two groups added back in, LPN test passers have fallen from 64,000 to 51,000 between 2010 and 2014. That's a drop of 13,000 or 20% since 2010. Now let's see what's happening to employer demand for LPNs. Will employers need more, or can they live with a dwindling number of new LPNs in the workforce? Well, BLS is very kind and provides its data and also is brave enough to make a forecast. They estimated there were about 740,000 LPNs in 2012. By 2022, they estimate the number will need to rise to 921,000. That's about 183,000 more LPNs than we had in 2010, or about 2.2% growth each year. With 50,000 new LPNs passing the NCLEX PN, really shouldn't be a problem to generate 183,000 more nurses in 10 years, or should it? Actually, despite the 50 to 65,000 new LPNs, the actual number of LPNs employed has been falling. In 22, there were 210,000. By 2014, there were only 695,000 LPNs, a drop of 5%. If this trend continues, the population of LPNs will actually shrink, not grow. What's causing the problem? In a word, the problem is turnover. 10% of LPNs leave the LPN ranks each year. They may stop being LPNs for several reasons. Some quit nursing. Many others get higher level degrees and become ADNs or BSNs, and we'll look at those markets in a second. So how did we come to this number on turnover? So let me do the math with you. There were 731,000 LPNs in 2010. In the next 4 years, back up chart, Liz. In the next 4 years, 55 to 65,000 students passed the NCLEX-PN, creating a total of 240,000 new LPNs. So if no new LPNs had left the workforce, there would have been 970,000 nurses in 2014. But there weren't. There were only 696,000. So 275,000 nurses must have stopped being LPNs. Roughly speaking, 10% of LPNs leave every year. And schools don't produce enough completions to replace these nurses. So what's the outlook? The long-term implication of this is if we start with 738,000 nurses and we lose 50 to 60,000 every year, almost 70,000 every year, we're going to end up with a loss of 700,000 nurses over the time period. We'll get back about 50,000 a year in new test passers, but that's obviously well short of the number of people who will leave. So by the end of the period, we anticipate having just 86,000 new LPNs. That's a drop of a couple 100,000 off the peak. But perhaps more frightening, BLS says we need 900,000, and that leaves a supply gap of almost 335,000 nurses. This suggests that there is and will be a shortage of LPNs. But are we seeing that shortage today? If there were a shortage of LPNs, we would expect to see wages, we'd expect to see wages rising quickly. But median LPN wage growth is only 1.3% annually. It hasn't even kept up with inflation. So wages don't suggest that we have a shortage yet. Now let's look at another employment indicator. We get this from Wanted Analytics. It's a score of hiring difficulty. It's on a scale of 0 to 100, where 100 is the most difficult to hire. And what we can see here is nursing assistants score an 8, very easy to hire. LPN, LVN is somewhat more difficult, but frankly, LPN, LVN is easier to hire than a typical associate's degree hire, not just for nursing, but any type of associate's degree hire in the healthcare industry. So the hiring statistics don't suggest that we have a shortage yet. There is one indicator that suggests a potential shortage. Job postings have risen 14% in 2014 and are on track to do so again in 2015. This is actually much faster than the BLS prediction of 2.2% annual growth. And it is possible that this trend is a result of a need for additional nurses. In our view, though, it's more likely that this is really confirming the churn, and that most of these jobs are to replace nurses who are moving from one hospital to another or leaving the nursing workforce, rather than the addition of new nursing positions. So really what we're seeing in this number, we believe, is more churn than growth. But it is possible that this is an indicator of a growth resuming in the LPN space. So let me summarize. In our view, there will be fewer LPNs in the future than there are today because there are more leavers than there are new graduates. There'll be fewer jobs, but the need for LPNs will decline, in part because hospitals and other locations won't actually be able to get them. So they'll learn to accommodate that by improving productivity or using other types of healthcare professionals to fill the jobs, such as medical assistants. As a result, there probably won't be a big gap between the number of LPNs and the jobs available for them. They'll both decline at similar rates. But we will have a lot of churn. 70,000 LPNs will get higher degrees or leave nursing every year. Now, let me turn it back to Liz, who will address the market for associate's degrees.
Great, thanks. So we'll start again as we look at the associate's degree nursing market with a profile of the typical student. And what we find are a lot of similar traits to those of the LPN audience. Again, there's a majority female, this time with about 85.5% of the student population. But there's an even younger skew with this specific audience, with 57% between 25 and 34 years old, and another 9.3% between 18 and 24. There's also a slightly higher average annual household income of $60,000 a year, and the majority of students are employed, full or part-time, at the time of enrollment. When it comes to media consumption, there are a few points of difference here as well. In addition to accessing the internet at home, this audience may also be logging on at work, which translates into more peak hour web usage. This is also an audience that really typifies the multi-device and multi-screen consumer. 73% use mobile phones for home internet access, 63% use laptops, and 36% use tablets. So there's clearly overlap here as people use different devices for different tasks. And unlike the LPN group, the associate's degree prospects are more likely to already be employed in some sort of healthcare-related profession and looking for a way to make a change and/or move up. Given the large number of RN to BSN students, which we'll look at in more detail shortly, many associate's nursing candidates seem to be using this as a first stop in their long-term careers. The Google search query volume for AD and related terms shows a similar seasonal pattern to the general nursing category. There has, however, been more significant query growth year over year. August 2015 was up 34.4% compared to the year prior, and as a whole, 2015 is strong so far. Associate's nursing volume has fared much better than that of the LPN programs, much more in line with the general nursing program inquiry trend over the past 2.5 years. Instead of continuing on the downward trend established in much of 2013, inquiry volume actually had a significant comeback in 2014. Then moving into this year, volume spiked again in January. And although it didn't sustain quite those high levels for the rest of the year, volume has been consistently up from last year. August ended up 4.7% higher year over year, which is actually on the lower end of the volume increase we've seen so far in 2015. Conversion rates are also looking a lot better for this program group, with a 7.6% average rate. January and February started out 2015 significantly stronger than the prior 2 years' performance before leveling off a bit in more recent months. Leaving aside the still not mature cohorts of July and August, it seems like ADN programs have had strong performance so far this year, particularly given the increase in inquiries we've seen during the same time frames. And now back to Bob for some more detail on associate's degree competition and employment trends.
Thanks, Liz. As was mentioned, let's take a look at competition for ADN education. The number of systems offering ADN programs has been growing slowly but steadily, about 1.5% a year. In 2010, there were 587 competitors. By 2014, this number had increased by 35 to 622. We also looked at the number of campuses offering ADN programs. That's growing a little bit more quickly at about 3% a year. In short, we got a little bit more competition at the ADN level. Fortunately, ADN completions were also growing, rising about 2% to 2.5% in 2013 through 2013. Unfortunately, in 2014, that completion growth stopped. So it may be resuming now based on Liz's numbers in terms of enrollment, but as of 2014, the number of completions had actually plateaued. Of course, to create new nurses and add additional supply, again, they have to take the test. And the number of U.S.-trained test takers stopped as completion stopped growing. So we flattened out in 2013 and 2014 between around 86,000 completers. Nonetheless, nearly 5,000 more U.S.-trained ADN graduates took the NCLEX RN exam for the first time in 2014 than they did in 2010. Now we get to the hard part. As I mentioned, they've made the test tougher, and fewer people are passing the NCLEX RN than used to. Pass rates for U.S. first-time ADN test takers peaked in 2012 at 89.3%, and then they dropped 10 points to 79% in 2014. In 2015, the pass rate appears to have stabilized and may have started to recover based on the first half results, but it remains 9 points lower than it was at the peak in 2012. As a result, the annual number of first-time ADN NCLEX test takers who pass the licensing exam has dropped 9% since its 2012 peak. At the peak, there were 75,000 passers a year. By 2014, the number had fallen by 7,000 to 68,000. The drop was caused almost entirely by the increased difficulty of the NCLEX RN exam. Fortunately, as with LPNs, there are other sources of passers, and one of those is growing. As more people fail the test the first time, the number of repeat test takers go up. And test passers in this group has risen by about 5,000, from 8,600 to 13,600. Foreign nurses have remained roughly the same at approximately 5,000. Overall, since 2010, test passers declined slowly from 88,000 to 86,000. But is this decline causing a shortage at this level? Let's look at one indicator here, hiring difficulty. And this is right in the middle. Probably not a shortage. Employers have about the same difficulty hiring ADNs as they do for other positions with comparable education requirements, i.e. an associate's degree. So on a scale of 100, with 100 being most difficult, as I mentioned, ADNs score 40. That's neither difficult to hire nor easy. And the average associate gets about a 33. And we'll look at some other factors affecting the employment of nurses in a moment, and the supply and demand when we look at BSN. But for now, let me turn it back to Liz. And as a summary, don't think there's a shortage here yet.
Okay, great. And now on to our final degree topic for today. We'll look at both traditional BSN degrees here, as well as degrees that bridge from RN to BSN. Starting again with our typical student profile, there are definitely some audience differences between these and the lower level LPN and ADN students, but not on the predominantly female part. If anything, this is the most strongly female group at almost 88% of all graduates. However, this does tend to be an older, often married student. About 36% of students are between 35 and 44 years old, and a full 78% are married. They're more affluent as well. The average annual income is just over $119,000 a year. There are households at all ends of the spectrum within the audience, but due to a 90% full-time employment rate and almost 60% of households with 2 working adults, these tend to be more established in higher total income households. 48% have also graduated college or more, and 35% have attended technical or vocational school in the past. Looking over to media consumption on the right, this is an audience who takes full advantage of the convenience of doing things online, as working families with children often do. There's more daytime and peak hour web usage, just as the associate's degree audience exhibited. Similarly, this audience shares a propensity to use multiple devices and screens in order to accomplish a task. 28% actually report using the internet more on a mobile device than on a PC, although about 3/4 of households use both for web access as well as tablets. Another common media habit amongst BSN students is streaming TV from sources like Hulu, Netflix, and other network sites. Given the need for convenience, it's not surprising that time-delayed viewing is popular with this audience. And finally, there's a strong family focus, as 74% of households have 1 or more child under the age of 18 present. Since many of the BSN students are taking some sort of bridge program or have worked in other aspects of healthcare previously, this degree is particularly attractive to those looking to advance or branch out professionally. The BSN program accounts for a large bulk of nursing program-specific keywords and ad groups, with 30 to 50% more monthly queries than either LPN or ADN-focused keywords. It's also remained consistently strong over much of the past 12 months shown here, with expected seasonal peaks in January and August. The total query volume growth was 30.1% from August 2014 to August 2015. Inquiry volume has shown some interesting patterns for the bachelor's degree level. After dropping in the first quarter of 2014, volume has been on a steady growth track since then. January 2015 was a high point for the past 2.5 years, but July and August of this year were close in total inquiries. Overall, volume was up 12.6% year over year in the most recent month of August. As mentioned, the RN to BSN bridge program has been popular with students looking to boost their career within the nursing field. Here we've separated total BSN and specific RN to BSN inquiry volumes for the same time period. RN to BSN bridge programs accounted for 60% of all bachelor's level nursing inquiries in August 2015, a share that's up from 52% for the same time period in 2014, but down from a peak share of 68% in 2013. As you can see, the volume trends for the two programs are pretty similar, aside from the lack of a sharp seasonal spike within the RN to BSN group from 2014 and 2015. Both program types, however, show the same consistent demand growth over the past year and a half. It's interesting to note that the bulk of the RN to BSN inquiries are for online programs, which you can see with the program format split out here. This gap between campus-based and online delivery starts to widen in late 2013 and continues in 2014. While the online RN to BSN volume exhibits growth consistent with the overall BSN demand trend line, the campus-based programs seem to kind of fall out of view around the same time and now are stagnant at best. Given the family-centric working student profile, it's not surprising that the more flexible online and hybrid online campus delivery formats have become more popular in recent months. Comparing the first two quarters' performance from 2013 to 2015, both program types have seen increasing marketing efficiency. BSN programs have the edge by between 3 and 4 percentage points during each time frame. 2014 in particular saw a huge performance increase, with average conversion rates coming in close to 12%. While the first two quarters of 2015 so far haven't quite reached those levels, they may still increase slightly as the final Q2 cohort matures. And regardless, they're still looking fairly strong compared to other nursing or general program performance. RN to BSN performance isn't quite as strong, with average performance between 7 and 9%. But keep in mind that a large percentage of inquiries are coming for online programs, which typically convert at a lower rate due to more diverse competition. So in that context, these actually have much better performance compared to other online programs, not to mention the steady performance gains year over year, with 2015 already surpassing 2014 performance despite not being fully mature at this point. And now back over to Bob for some more detail on RN and BSN market factors that are driving this program's success in recent months.
Thanks. As you probably know, competition is increasing in the BSN market. Many of the institutions offering the number of institutions offering BSN programs has been growing about 3.5% a year. Moreover, many of the RN to BSN programs are offered online at the national level. As a result, schools who only had to compete locally are now facing a national market with major brands in intense competition. The number of competitors may be growing. Do we have enough students here to go around? Fortunately, there are. BSN completions have increased 11% annually, well outpacing the 3% growth of new colleges offering a BSN degree. As you would expect, most growth in BSN completions has occurred in RN to BSN programs. RN to BSN programs grew at about a 28% annual rate in 2011 and 2012. At the same time, pre-licensure BSN programs have been growing at a pretty good clip themselves. They have risen approximately 5% since 2010. Importantly, of these, only BSN pre-licensure programs create new RNs. RN to BSN programs do not increase the supply of RNs, since only licensed RNs can enter the program. RN to BSN programs do increase the educational level of RNs, but as I mentioned, they don't increase the number of licensed nurses, or RNs as a whole. Let's look at how this population of RNs is faring. Of course, this starts with understanding the number of test takers. The number of U.S.-trained bachelor's level NCLEX test takers is growing about 5%. 55,000 U.S. first-time test takers took the NCLEX in 2010. By 2014, this number had risen to 68,000, an increase of nearly 13,000. Finally, a nursing group that's growing, or not. As always, we've got this problem with the NCLEX test. 14 to 15% of new test takers now fail the NCLEX, which, as in the other areas, got tougher in 2013. From a peak of 91.7 in 2012, pass rates fell to approximately 85% by 2014. Better than ADN's, but still a 7% decline. Pass rates have increased slightly in 2015, but remain 5.8% below the peak. That means roughly 4,000 students who would have passed in 2012 failed the NCLEX in 2015. In effect, the growth in pre-licensure completions was offset by lower pass rates. As a result, the number of first-time test passers has been almost flat since 2012. Without the fluctuations in NCLEX pass rates, the number of new BSN nurses would have grown close to 5%. Now, as in the other areas, we've got other sources of test passers, in particular the repeats. And when we add them back, fortunately, we do get to growth in the overall pre-licensure graduates. Almost 50,000 RNs received their BSN. That's up 134,000 since 2010. And let's take a look and see if that's going to keep up with demand, recalling that only the first-time passers and repeat passers actually increased the population of RNs. BLS projects RN employment growth of 1.8% annually, somewhat faster than most occupations. BLS does not distinguish ADNs from BSNs in these estimates, so the balance of this presentation is going to look at the total supply and demand for both ADNs and BSNs. In 2012, RN employment was about 2.7 million. By 2022, BLS projects a significant increase, 527,000 new nurses to 3.2 million. And one might think of this as the number of nurses who will be needed in the workplace, whether or not we can supply them. BLS does not forecast educational attainment levels, so in the future, we can't tell their split between ADNs and BSNs, though we would expect, just because of the way the supply market's shaping up, that the number of BSNs will, or the percentage of BSNs will grow over this period. And we may not make our 80% by 20% by 2020 objective, but that ratio will increase of BSN trained nurses. While BLS is forecasting growth, and they've been doing forecasting growth really since 2010 and again in 2012, the facts on the ground are different. Despite hundreds of thousands of RNs, both ADNs and BSNs, passing the licensure exams, the number of RNs has actually shrunk slightly since 2011. At its peak, there were 2.72 million nurses in the workforce. By 2014, there were only 2.68 million. Where did all of them go? I suspect many of you can guess the answer. It's about attrition. They either moved up to MSN or left nursing. And again, if we walk through the numbers, there were 2.66 million RNs in 2010. Since then, 600 new RNs passed the NCLEX RN. So if no RNs had left, there would have been 3.25 million registered nurses in 2014. But of course there weren't. There were only 2.69 million nurses employed in 2014. The difference, 567,000 nurses, must have stopped working as RNs. And please recall, this is churn for all RNs, both ADNs and BSNs. In other words, approximately 5% of employed RNs must be leaving the workforce each year or moving up to the graduate level. As all those nurses you train, in effect, don't add to the nursing population. They just keep up with attrition. So this makes us worry about a shortage. And again, we looked at the data to see if there's evidence of a shortage. And here it's really a tough call. As you look at the sources of new registered nurses, we've got substantial growth. About 154,000 new nurses join the workforce each year, and most are ADNs and BSNs who pass the NCLEX on their first try. It seems like a lot of new nurses. But all these nurses are needed just to fill existing positions. Over the period between 2012 and 2022, we expect 1.5 million nurses to leave the workforce. Ironically, there's almost exactly 1.5 million new nurses who will join the workforce. So at the end of this period, we expect we'll have almost the same number of nurses that we have today. No change. If this is true, there will be a supply gap of approximately 500,000 nurses in 2022. Now, do we have evidence of a shortage? Again, let's look at wages. And it really surprised me to find that RN wages are growing at 1%, actually well below inflation, even lower than the ADN wage average we saw a few minutes ago. So the wages do not confirm shortage. Neither do the hiring difficulty scores. Hiring a registered nurse is about a 43 at the bachelor's level. As I mentioned, it's a 40 at the associate's level. So not a lot of trouble finding these folks. It's not easy, but it's no more difficult than hiring any other bachelor's candidate in the healthcare industry. As in the other areas, we do see an increase in job postings, but here again with the churn, we expect that a lot of that is actually churn and filling existing positions rather than new positions that need new nurses. But in any case, all of these national statistics belie an enormous amount of variation in local markets. As Liz mentioned, there's a lot of demand for nursing in the north and the northeast. Similarly, there are a lot of nurses there. So we've got a high proportion of nurses in the Northeast and the upper Midwest. Where we see a shortage is generally in the Southwest. As you can see, they're starting in Texas and running up through Nevada. But here again, even this data is a little misleading, though it shows some shortages. Let's take a look at California in more detail. And here we can see that the actual balance of supply and demand in California varies substantially from Southern California and LA being fairly well supplied to shortages just north of there and shortages just south of the Bay Area as well. So even within a geography, the supply-demand balance can be quite different. So how do you deal with this? What analysis do you have to do in order to understand whether a market's going to be attractive for a nursing program? What we've done is created the ability to score programs on 4 characteristics: student demand, employment, strategic fit, and competitive intensity. And we actually score all 100 largest markets in the U.S. and can go further than that if it's appropriate. But it allows you to see how those markets perform for the nursing program quickly and across the entire United States at a local level. As you'll notice, at the very top here is Houston. Let's take a little bit deeper look and see why Houston scored so well. Now, fortunately, I'm not going to take you through every number on this chart, but we did create a detailed profile for this, and you can see that the ground inquiries here at 2,700 were at the 80th percentile. That is, out of the top 100 U.S. markets, there were about 20 that were as good as this market. The rest would be lower. You can see the online demand was about in line as well at the 80th percentile. Now let's look down for a moment at competition. Back up, Liz. On the competitive side, there are only 5 nursing schools in Houston, and the cost per inquiry there is actually quite low. It's one of the better ones. Again, about 20 cities where it's lower in the U.S. And completions per capita, they're only 0.93, which makes it in the top 10%. And that, in this case, where lower is better, obviously you want less competition, but there are only 10 other cities where completions per capita are less than they are in Houston, so that makes it a more attractive market. So it's just a tool you can use to help evaluate the nursing market, or actually the market for any program, so you can understand it not just nationally, but at a local level. So overall in the RN space, we expect a stable workforce. ADNs are likely to fall, BSNs will grow. We expect employer demand to basically match that. Growth in healthcare costs that you often hear about turn out in many cases to be medications and technology rather than labor. And so there isn't quite as much demand for RNs as one might think. We also think employers are learning to manage with a flat supply of RNs. They're using productivity improvements and they're substituting labor where possible. For example, using MAs for lower level work and asking the nurses to work up to their degree level. Overall, we don't anticipate a gap. The number of RNs that are created will be matched about by the number of jobs as employers learn to live with a short supply. But there will be a lot of churn with 150,000 RNs leaving their positions each year. And finally, local variation is going to make understanding your market critical. Let me turn it back to Liz.
Okay, so now that we've gone through each of the various degree levels in detail, let's just take a minute real quickly to recap some of those key takeaways before we open things up for questions. So starting off with demand trends, the first thing I hope that we were able to demonstrate today is just how different each of these audiences are and how reaching each one needs to be approached slightly differently. Some key things that marketers should keep in mind when planning campaigns for each group are listed here. So with the LPN programs, you know, it's a younger prospect, one that's likely looking for a change in careers. And while the inquiry demand and conversion rates have been weak, there is within the search query data certainly trends that indicate there's still interest out there. So as a result, it's really important that schools carefully consider their marketing and messaging to help students really understand the opportunities available to them via this entry-level degree. And since we learned that the main web access point for this audience is through mobile devices, it's really critical for marketing managers to plan and deploy media with this in mind. So providing responsive web design, click-to-call options, and so on. Looking at the associates level programs, this is a much more mixed demographic. So while they're still mainly on the younger side, they may already be employed in the healthcare field and just looking for a way to get into the more growth-oriented nursing field. Demand and conversion rates were definitely better than average in 2015, but there's not been a tremendous amount of growth in either recently. So focusing on how to translate that increase in people searching into an increase in students enrolling is key to taking advantage of that prospective student curiosity. And the fact that they, along with the BSN candidates, are really multi-device users means that marketers must approach this audience with a really cohesive and cross-channel oriented strategy. Solely focusing on traditional or digital media, for example, or failing to make sure websites are easily accessible from any device means potentially missing out on the opportunity to connect with someone when they're ready to take those next steps. And finally, with the BSN degrees, both the traditional and the bridge versions, this is definitely the most growth-oriented area within the undergraduate nursing market. But the demographics are definitely different from the LPN and ADN groups with a much more middle-aged established candidate. So flexibility and convenience, specifically for this full-time employed and family-oriented group, really at every marketing and admission stage is critical to successfully enrolling that individual. And since demand and conversions are strong here, schools will really need to focus on how to differentiate themselves and their programs from their competitors, especially with so many of the BSN bridge programs offered online. Figuring out areas of differentiation and emphasizing these in areas like branding and content will really help programs stand out.
And the message overall for supply and demand is a familiar one from this presentation. What we expect is the number of nurses who leave and the number of nurses who come in to be roughly in balance. 2.1 million will leave, about 2 million will come back, and most of the shortage will be at the lower levels of nursing, with BSN being about level. So overall, we'll end up with about the same number of nurses in 2022 as we had in 2012. And if employers adapt and we don't hurt too many patients because there may be a shortage, we'll be fine. But if BLS is right, we have a gap here of almost 821,000 nurses in 2022. So there may be a coming shortage, but again, the data we've seen, like wages and hiring difficulty, suggests that shortage is not here yet and may not materialize.
Okay, great. So I think that takes us to the end of our presentation. So I'll turn it back over to Michelle for any questions that we received during the presentation.
Thank you so much, Liz and Bob. Now, before we take some questions, again, if you do have any, please type them into the question box in your webinar control panel. If you can't see the control panel at the moment, look into the top right corner of your screen. You'll see an orange box with a white arrow. Click on that and the box will expand and you can ask your questions. It looks like we've had several questions coming in during the presentation. So the first one will be, let's see, what is the total inquiry volume that was studied and for how many schools in the data you've gathered?
So within this data set, we had approximately, I believe, 5 million inquiries, if I remember correctly, over a wide variety of institutions. I believe we had a total of 15 key institutional systems that we specifically studied here, ones that we had data from 2013 through the present on. So not necessarily every nursing school that we work with, but the ones where we have some consistent trends there. So it was we believe, a fairly sufficient sample size.
Okay, so thank you so much, Liz. Another question that came in was, someone was asking, do schools that offer the BSN program online offer a discounted tuition rate?
I'm not sure on that point. Bob, do you have any insight on that?
One thing you can be sure of in this day and age is somebody's discounting it out there somewhere. Of course, they're not calling it a discount. It would be called a scholarship of some sort. And there are a variety of those in the market. They could be geographic. Sometimes they're for staying around and finishing. You'll get incentives and so forth. But there are definitely scholarships being offered in this field.
I do know also that the RN to BSN is shorter than the traditional BSN, so I'd imagine that probably brings down the cost as well.
Yeah.
All right, great, thank you. Another question was, do your studies take into consideration the fact that online education tends to be more difficult and thus a higher attrition rate?
I'm not sure. We don't necessarily on the marketing side follow through to the full graduation point from, I guess, enrollment to marketing. So I don't necessarily see that. I do know that overall online schools tend to have lower retention rates, so students are more likely to drop out for a variety of factors, one of them being academic challenges, others just being life circumstances and things like that. But I'm not able to comment specifically on whether or not the online format leads to any of this attrition.
It's a little different in nursing. I don't know the sort of average numbers, but nurses come in and, like many adult learners, especially any other learner who's got a degree already at whatever level, the odds of them completing go way up because they've already demonstrated that they can do the college level work, and they tend to be a more committed student who also, just plain has the skills to get through school, whether those are study skills or reading and writing. So completion rates for BSN, RN to BSN programs tend to be much higher than you would expect for online. It doesn't hurt that many of their employers require these nurses to get a BSN or lose their job or be demoted. So there's a major incentive on the employer side to get through the program. So I think you'll see that in RN to BSN programs, while there is generally an issue with online education, it is not as applicable to nurses.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, so another question says, is your profile, your profile for BSN seems focused on RN to BSN programs. So does your research suggest that a BSN program focused on traditional students, say 18 to 21-year-olds only, would that be attractive?
Specifically for the RN to BSN programs for that audience, so I guess from the way that I'm understanding the question, that's absolutely accurate, that when we look at the more traditional four-year BSN student coming in as an 18-year-old, yes, this is definitely a different audience. They tend to, not have families. They tend to be younger, less affluent. Obviously, they're kind of fitting that more traditional student model. Our data set specifically had a very overwhelming skew towards the RN to BSN. I think the figure was 60% RN to BSN. So yes, we absolutely, within our data set, have a more adult, non-traditional learner who tends to be employed, who tends to be kind of seeking this as a latter degree as opposed to a first-time, full-time degree, in which case, there we would want to focus maybe more specifically on typical profiles of that more traditional college student.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Another question is asking, can you define what makes the nursing market competitive? What factors determine that?
There are a few aspects of that. One is how many competitors there actually are in the market, the number of schools offering it. I think the mode of the offer also matters, whether you're on ground or online. If you're on ground, you're only really able to compete within 30 to 50 miles of your campus typically. So you could have a lot more on-ground competitors in the U.S. than you can carry online. And then, of course, there's a couple of, really three big constraints in competition. One is, are there enough students out there who want to take nursing? And the answer to that's generally yes. In fact, typically every year there are tens of thousands of students who can't get into a pre-licensure program. The second question is there enough jobs for students when they get out? Again, generally yes, mostly because of churn rather than growth. But the real issue here is, can you get clinical slots? And that is a genuine constraint at every level in nursing. And as a result, the boards of nursing often constrain the size of these programs. So the real point of competition here is two places. One, regulatory, getting the board of nursing to give you permission to add seats to your nursing program. And two, being able to find clinical positions for your students. Very, very tough these days to find hospitals that will increase the number of slots for students. So that's really where the battle takes place.
Great, thanks so much, Bob. Another question we had come in was asking, do the inquiry levels and conversion data used for these studies, does it take into consideration the whole market or just Sparkroom and Gray Associate clients?
It takes into consideration, in this case, specifically Sparkroom clients. So just to let you know kind of what that looks like, on an average month, we process approximately 750,000 student inquiries, primarily from career-focused educators, but also from a spectrum of other graduate, some competitive, not-for-profit institutions, et cetera. So while it does just take into account that, we have about 56 million student inquiries that we're using for our sample size. So we feel like it's a pretty good reflection of the career education market. I do believe in some cases, particularly in Bob's sections, there is more reliance on national publicly available data. It's not restricted specifically to those, but when we talk about inquiry and conversion rates, that is constricted to Sparkroom data.
Yeah, Liz, one point I wanted to make is Gray's really a strategy consulting firm. We're not an agency. As a result, we don't share any client data as part of a presentation like this, or frankly ever, except with the client themselves. So our clients do not have any data in the inquiry data sets or in any of the other charts you saw today, unless it comes in through iPads or something like that.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Bob and Liz. Unfortunately, we do have more questions coming in, but we are at 3 o'clock right now. So I just want to thank everyone for all of your excellent questions. Thank you, Liz and Bob, for all your hard work on this presentation. If you do have any further questions or like additional information, as you can see on your screen, feel free to contact Liz at webinars@sparkroom.com, and you can reach Bob at bobatkins@grayassociates.com. Don't worry if you didn't have a chance to write that down. You will receive a copy of this presentation tomorrow afternoon with everyone's contact info, as well as a link to the recording. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you for your time. For more performance marketing resources, including our series of on-demand webinars, go to sparkroom.com/resources.